talk about growing asparagus. So I said before, if you've never tasted asparagus from a homegrown veggie patch, then you really haven't tasted asparagus. The spears that I get, you can see some there, I mean, they're thicker than my thumb, really. And I look at the ones grown in shops, sold in shops, and I think, oh, you poor things, you haven't tasted real asparagus. And definitely, please, everybody, never ever buy asparagus out of season. Spring is asparagus season. It's coming from the other side of the world if you're eating it now. Okay, let's talk about how to grow it ourselves. So I'm going to go on different tips here. So tip number 1, you have to start with asparagus crowns, and that's what it looks like, not the seeds or seedlings. On the right there, they're asparagus seedlings. So asparagus do generate seeds, and you can plant them. The difference between the one on the right and one on the left is that root system there on the left is easily 2 years old already, whereas the one on the right, it's just freshly grown. The point about that is that you really shouldn't be eating or harvesting asparagus that you've grown until that root or that crown is about 5 years old. Goodness me, that's the ultimate slow food, isn't it? So where do you get these from? Just a sec. You can buy them from garden centres. They're available now. Good garden centres. You can probably buy them online. There are different varieties available. The most common one's called Mary Washington. But there is also another one, pardon the French here, it's called the Fat Bastard. Because they really are big fat spears. And contrary to what you might think big fat spears they're going to be tougher and woodier. No, they're not. They're just even more tender and more succulent. So it's certainly well worth going through ones with big fat spears. How many asparagus plants do you need? Well, if you're big asparagus eaters in your household, 1 to 2 plants per person in your household. So there's 5 of us in my family. 1 doesn't like asparagus. He's a bit weird. So I've got at least 8 plants for the rest of us, because those root systems only throw up a spear or 2 every day. So you're not going to get masses of asparagus all at once unless you've got several plants happening. So you can buy asparagus seeds. You can even go to nurseries and buy asparagus seedlings. But really, unless you're prepared to wait those 5 years in order to start harvesting your asparagus, buy the crowns instead. Then, my next tip is you need to dedicate a bed for your asparagus, because this is something that once you've planted it and you've looked after it, it will keep feeding you for up to 25 years. Now, this is really important. So it's got to be in a lovely sunny spot in your garden. And this bed, for example, is 2.4 metres long by 1.2 metres wide. That'll fit 2 rows of asparagus. And I'll show you how many you can plant at that point. Before planting, so if you're planning on planting some asparagus, get your soil prepared well beforehand, because you're not going to be moving this asparagus. You might divide it in about 10 years' time, but in the meantime, it's going to stay there. So you want some beautiful soil. Copious additions of organic matter. By that I mean compost, well-rotted manures such as your cow manure, horse manure if it's well-rotted or composted, mushroom compost, lots of different varieties you can get in there. But what we want is a lovely, rich, loamy soil to which you're adding that organic matter. Now, check your drainage. It's pretty important because those roots go down deeply and we don't want them sitting in water. So I would probably avoid wicking beds. It's a little bit like the garlic last week. Avoid wicking beds. It's just that the roots stay in here forever and ever. And if you've got drainage issues, it's going to be a problem. So first of all, check your drainage in your own soil, but avoid wicking beds anyway. And each of those root systems, we're going to space about 45 to 50 centimetres apart. So looking at that bed from before, 1.2 by 2.4 metres long, I could probably fit 1, 2, 3, 4, perhaps, 5 on one side and 5 down the other side. So perhaps 8 to 10 crowns of asparagus in here, which might seem like a lot, but remember they only throw up, 2 or 3 spears every day. in their growing season. So we'll talk about when that is as well. So once you've got your soil prepared, this is how we actually plant them. Now, this isn't a picture of mine because I didn't have one, but in that row that you've got, you need to dig a trench about 20 centimetres deep. So think about a spade's depth, and mound up the soil in the middle, because those asparagus crowns then have to sit on the middle of that soil. You sort of splay the roots apart so that it sits like that. I think I can show you here. So some roots to one side, some roots to the other, and that part in the middle, which is called the crown, that's got to sit at the highest point. And then we backfill with all that lovely soil that you're prepared and cover that, so it's covered to about 8 to 10 centimetres. And it's from those points there that the new asparagus will start to shoot through. So you've covered it all, and then we put mulch over the top. Asparagus doesn't like root competition. Mulch will just help to try and keep weeds at bay. So it's not terribly complicated, but don't try and plant them on flat soil or just mound up that, make a little ridge in the middle and sit the crowns over the top there. And as the daylight hours start to get longer, your asparagus should start to appear. For me, that is, and this is where my garden diary comes in handy, it's usually the start of August, end of July, start of August. And it is a sign of great rejoicing in the household. The first of the asparagus has started to come up. Now, you don't harvest it straight away. Allow it to grow to about 20 centimetres before you start to harvest. And when you do harvest, you don't cut it at the base. You sort of go down a little bit underneath the soil surface and cut from there. It's still edible asparagus, but you know, whenever you buy asparagus, you snap off the woody bit at the end. Well, that's the bit that you're cutting down to, that woody bit there. Now, there's a bit but happening here, a big but. Remember that in your first year, you don't harvest your asparagus. You don't harvest until the crowns have been in the soil for at least 2 to 3 years, making them 5 years old. Okay, I know that's really difficult to do, and I have to admit that I did harvest some when they were young, but literally only some, you know, 1 or 2 spears from each plant, just to get a taste of it. The reason we don't keep harvesting is these asparagus will eventually grow and then feed the root system underneath. But once your asparagus have come of age, you know, they're about 5 years old, then you harvest for about 6 to 8 weeks. They will continue to grow after that, but again, we want our harvest to be, our asparagus to be long-lived in that soil, presuming you're going to stay in the same property for a while. But anyway, we want it to be long-lived, and so we need to look after the root system and not harvest too much. And there's the point about cutting the spears 2 to 3 centimetres below the soil surface. Right, so what happens to the asparagus that you don't harvest is this. They start to get longer and longer. And by that stage, you can see some of them here. Look at them there. They become far too woody. You wouldn't want to eat them anyway, even if you did harvest them. They're just too tough. There's still some smaller ones here, but they're all getting too tall. So they get taller and taller, and they start to develop fronds, which are just leaves, basically, or asparagus fern type leaves. It's very, very fine, and there it is there, going to full size. And that's what it's going to look like in summertime for you. So from those beautiful little asparagus spears, we get these asparagus ferns happening. And you might think, oh my God, looks terrible in the garden. Well, you've just got to grin and bear it, because all of the nutrients that are in those leaves, those stems, will eventually die back and start to go yellow. And here it is there. So over spring, summer and autumn, they start to yellow and they get more and more yellow like that. And then we are allowed to cut them back. So the stems are going to look quite old and browned off a little bit, I suppose. You cut them right down to the base. Now, I did mine last week in anticipation of this talk so I could take a photo of it, and here they are. That's all those things you saw before, cut down to the base. So by this stage here, all the nutrients that are in the leaves have gone back in to feed the root system that has developed underneath. And that is really, really important. So if you want to kill your asparagus, you just keep eating it and don't let it get to this stage, but it won't be there for you next year. And then after that, what I do in anticipation of a great spring harvest, I go through and I top dress. And that just means getting some of my finished compost and some fertilizer. I like this organic fertilizer, pelletized animal manure, and sprinkle that over the surface. Be generous with it, then put compost over the top, and then I mulch. And then I leave it and just wait until spring when the whole cycle starts all over again. So the action in your asparagus bed really happens, say from August, September, and a little bit of October perhaps. And then that's when you're harvesting, and then you leave everything. But you've got to leave it there until winter when you cut it all back and replenish the soil a little bit. You're not digging anything out, you're just putting stuff over the top. And in springtime, you start to see these things coming up all over again. Now, ongoing care of your asparagus, once you've got it in there, watering is really important, particularly over spring and summer. You want those asparagus spears to be juicy and succulent, so that's the need for the spring watering, but don't let them dry out over summer as well, because they are still growing and you want them to be able to nourish down below. Asparagus comes in, those crowns either a male or female. You don't need one or the other in order to sort of fertilize each other. It doesn't work that way. But the female plants eventually grow these little red berries, which are toxic, by the way, but those berries contain seeds, which I have noticed do spread about the garden. Don't ask me how, perhaps birds eat them and then go and poo all over the place, but I have noticed little asparagus ferns coming up around my garden. If you can never tell if you look at the asparagus crown when you go to buy it, whether it's male or female, but it is actually better to have male ones because the female ones put energy into growing the seed. So the spears aren't as fat, say, as the ones that the males put up instead.